everyone, welcome back. Today we'll be reviewing the tropical outlook for Tropical Storm Debby, as well as another disturbance in portions of the Atlantic. So let's go ahead and get into it. So first off, here's Tropical Storm Debby off the west coast of Florida, and then here's our second disturbance that actually has a 20% chance to develop into a tropical depression or tropical storm in the next 7 days. But let's take a closer look at Tropical Storm Debby. Here it is right now, bringing some tropical storm winds into portions of near Tampa. And this is supposed to make it to hurricane status just later today. And then it is supposed to make a landfall in portions of Big Bend in Florida as a hurricane. And then this track was shifted a little further north, as it is actually supposed to ride over near Savannah, most likely, as it was further south and was supposed to make a landfall, or excuse me, not a landfall, but ride over portion somewhere in between Savannah and Jacksonville. So that has gone for the north. But let's take a look at this on Zoom Earth. This is a great app, and this is basically Google Maps combined with the tropics. So here is the satellite view. Here it is right now. And then it is supposed to make it to a 75-mile-per-hour hurricane around 8 p.m. tonight, and then move into portions of the Panhandle of Florida as a 90-mile-per-hour Category 1, and this will actually have wind gusts up to 115 miles an hour, believe it or not, and then continue near portions of Valdosta as a 70-mile-per-hour tropical storm, and then continues weakens to a 45-mile-per-hour tropical storm, and then once it gets near Savannah, right off the coast, supposed to strengthen a little bit back to a 50-mile-per-hour tropical storm, and then get back into portions of South Carolina. But it could make a secondary landfall even back in portions of Georgia, but most likely going to make a second landfall in portions of South Carolina. So let's take a look at some of our models. This is the GFS model, verifying a little too weak, but doing pretty good. But this has it weakened down to strengthened down to a 990 millibar hurricane around 8 p.m. tonight, and then strengthened down to a 980 millibar. Most likely that'd be a Category 2 hurricane around 8 a.m. tomorrow, as it then makes a landfall probably about 10 or 11 a.m. Maybe a little earlier, maybe a little later. And then it moves into portions of Georgia. We will have a ongoing tornado threat as well. And then it does weaken a little bit, and then goes back out off the coast, and moves back in, makes a secondary landfall in portions of Georgia, as most likely a strong tropical storm, maybe even a low-end hurricane, as it's hard to see it right there. But can you see that little bit of clearing? Right there, you got that little white spot right inside of my circle. That actually indicates that it could be a hurricane, because that would be an eye. Let's not pay attention to that too closely, but it would make a landfall, most likely a strong tropical storm, maybe a weak hurricane, then goes back into portions of Georgia, and eventually weakens down somewhat. Next up is the European model, also verifying way too weak. This is like 10 millibars off, so this does get down, though, to a 993 millibar tropical storm, or maybe a low-end hurricane, as it then makes landfall in portions of Florida, and then moves into portions of Georgia, and actually starts to strengthen over land, which can happen, but it's not very common, but it can happen, and then this does strengthen into a lower Category 1 hurricane, as it then goes in to make a landfall in portions of maybe South Carolina or North Carolina. Let's back it up. And then, yes, this makes a landfall basically on the border of South Carolina and North Carolina, and then heads on out of here. Next up is the Canadian model, also verifying way too weak, about 10 millibars off as well. It makes a landfall as a tropical storm, brings a very bad tornado threat, according to this. You see all these reds and oranges in here. That would definitely that verifies that there'd be a pretty big tornado threat which there is most likely going to be. And then this does strengthen a little bit over land again, then gets back off the coast, and then makes a secondary landfall in North Carolina, and then heads on out to sea. And then we have the icon model. This is verifying a little better, but not too well. Still about 10 millibars off. It does strengthen it to a 984 millibar Category 1, borderline Category 2 hurricane, as it then makes landfall in portions of Florida. And then this does get into portions of Georgia as well, and actually would maintain that hurricane strength, possibly all the way until it gets off the coast, and then this shows it almost making a secondary landfall in South Carolina, but it doesn't. Starts going out to sea, strengthens to a 952 millibar low pressure. That'd most likely be a strong Category 3, maybe borderline Category 4 hurricane, as it then makes a landfall in the Outer Banks of North Carolina and maintains that hurricane strength until it possibly gets all the way into portions of Delmarva, and then this heads on out of there as well. So next is the H-half-A model. This is a hurricane model. This is verifying pretty well. Still a few millibars off, but pretty good. And then we'll keep this moving. It gets it down to a 987, I believe, millibar, and then it gets it down to 985. Weakens a little bit right before landfall, but still makes landfall as a hurricane and gets it into portions of Florida, and then gets into portions of Georgia, and that's when we would have that large tornado threat as well. So we could have lots of spin-ups, which I believe we will, which we will cover in a few minutes. And then this keeps moving. Still brings more of that tornado threat. Gets off the coast, just kind of sits there, and then moves around a little bit, bringing possibly multiple days of a tornado threat. But after that, doesn't really do too much. Next is the H-half-B model. This is verifying, I believe, exactly what Debby is currently. Yeah, 992 millibar, and this is verifying as a 992 millibar hurricane or tropical storm. So let's keep this moving. This does strengthen down to about a 985 millibar Category 1 hurricane. Makes a landfall in Florida, and then brings that tornado threat into portions of Georgia as well, and South Carolina. Also going to mention South Carolina, you could have a big tornado threat as well. And then we'll keep this moving. Just kind of sits there, and then does bring more rainfall and possibly a smaller tornado threat back into portions of Florida. Next up is the excessive rainfall forecast. This is coming from the ERO, which works with the National Weather Service and is connected to NOAA. And so today we have a moderate risk of flash flooding. Tampa, you are almost in this. Actually, Tampa, you are in this, but just barely. And this goes up almost into portions of Tallahassee and near Gainesville. And then for tomorrow, a large, moderate risk of flash flooding. This includes Jacksonville, Tallahassee, Savannah, Georgia, and this does all go all the way up into portions of Charleston and down even near portions of Albany, Georgia. And then for the day 3, we have a high risk of flash flooding that does include Savannah, Georgia, Charleston, South Carolina, and almost Myrtle Beach. Well, actually, Myrtle Beach, you are included in that. And then there's a moderate risk of flash flooding surrounding that does include Fort Stewart, that goes all the way down in Brunswick, and this does go all the way up into Wilmington, North Carolina. And then day 4, we have another risk of flash flooding. That's a moderate risk of flash flooding that includes Charleston and Savannah, Georgia. And then for day 5, we have a moderate risk of flash flooding once again that includes Charleston and Savannah, Georgia, going up near Myrtle Beach. So next up is the National Weather Service. These are all of our alerts. So these are our advisories, watches, and warnings. And we do have a tornado watch that includes a lot of Florida as well. And I looked at this earlier. There's actually a 50% chance for 2 or more tornadoes. So next is the Storm Prediction Center. We have a slight risk today that does include Tampa and Fort Myers, almost going up into Tallahassee, but that does include Jacksonville as well. And this includes that 5% tornado risk. And when I was saying in yesterday's video, I was thinking that they were going to add a slight risk somewhere into there. Well, they did, but they made it even larger than I was expecting. And then they added a 5% wind risk as well. That goes almost all the way up into Savannah, Georgia. But then we have another slight risk in portions of Montana with a 15% wind risk and then a 5% hail risk, but not too much going on up in there. And then we have a slight risk for day 2 as well. This includes almost Tallahassee, Florida, but this does include Jacksonville, Florida, Savannah, Georgia, and this does go all the way up into Charleston, South Carolina. And we have a 5% tornado risk in that. And then a smaller 2% tornado risk surrounding that. That does include Tallahassee and Tampa and Orlando as well. It does actually make it all the way up into the South Carolina and North Carolina border. And then there's there are 2 other areas of a slight risk. One in portions of Minnesota, and then another one that goes all the way from Ohio up to Maine, and then a small marginal risk in Montana, but not going to speak on that too much. But there's a 5% tornado risk in portions of Iowa and Minnesota, and then a 15% wind risk in both of those slight risk areas up north, and then a 5% wind risk in Montana, and then there are 2 areas of a 15% hail risk as well in the north. And then last, we have the day 3 severe weather outlook. There are 3 areas of a marginal risk. One includes Charleston, South Carolina, and Savannah, Georgia, and another one in Montana, and then another one that extends all the way from Indiana up into portions of Rhode Island. And just as of now, just a 5% risk of severe weather. But that marginal risk in the southeast, that includes Savannah and Charleston, there will be a 2% tornado risk at least if they do not add a slight risk into portions in here. So I believe they will add possibly a very, very small slight risk and then extend that marginal risk out maybe just a little further. With that, one more look at Tropical Storm Debby. Here it is. Has a very large wind field, and then that is supposed to make a landfall as a 95, I believe, mile per hour Category 1 hurricane with gusts up to 115 miles an hour. So with that, thank you for watching. I will see y'all in the next one. Stay safe, everyone, and I may have a video actually of some of the impacts because I will be impacted by this system. But we will most likely have a live stream possibly tomorrow or on Tuesday, and then maybe a live stream later today. So if you want to check that out, make sure to go to the Stormchaser 575 YouTube channel if you are watching this on the Georgia Storm Trackers YouTube channel, and I will have it pinned in the community tab for that link to the live stream. So with that, thank you for watching, everyone, and I will see you on the next one. Have a good one, everybody.